It was still dark when the bells began to ring. Their sound didn't echo like it usually did. It clung to the mist, heavy and uncertain, as though the air itself didn't want to carry it too far. I remember sitting up in my narrow bed, heart pounding, before I even understood why. The bell rope was only pulled at that hour for one reason: death. I slipped into my wool habit, the cold biting my skin even through the coarse fabric, and crossed the dormitory where the other novices were stirring, whispering, praying under their breath. Sister Bernadette, the eldest of us, looked at me from her bunk. "Stay here," she whispered. But I couldn't. Something in the sound of the bell felt personal, like it had been calling my name all along. The corridor outside smelled of damp stone and candle wax. The convent was old, centuries older than any of us, built by monks who once fled the wars to live in silence. Its walls were thick, its windows narrow, and in winter the wind cried through the cracks like a soul denied entry to heaven. My bare feet made no sound on the flagstones as I passed the sleeping quarters and moved toward the chapel. The door to the chapel was open. That was the first sign that something was wrong. It was never left open. Inside, the light was dim. Only the candles on the altar burned, long and low, their flames bending under a draft that came from nowhere. And there, at the front, knelt the Mother Superior. Or at least I thought she was praying. Her hands were clasped tightly around something pale, pressed against her chest. I remember whispering her name, "Mother Clara?" But she didn't move. When I came closer, the air changed. I could feel it, heavy and cold, as if every breath I took belonged to someone else. Her face was turned slightly toward the crucifix, eyes half open, lips parted. There was no movement, no sound, not even the faint tremor of breath. She was gone. It took me a moment to realize what she was holding. Not a rosary, not a Bible, a blanket. It was small, too small for anything but a baby. Soft wool worn thin with age. The color might once have been white, but time and sorrow had turned it the color of ashes. I saw her fingers clutching its corner as though protecting it, even in death. I wanted to scream. I didn't. Something about the chapel made noise feel sinful. I backed away, stumbling, and only when I reached the door did I find my voice. "Help!" I whispered first, then louder, "Help!" The nuns came quickly. First Sister Margaret, then Sister Helena, then the others. They filled the chapel with the low murmur of shock, of prayers, of disbelief. Some wept, some crossed themselves in silence. The candlelight flickered across their faces, and for a moment I could almost believe she was only sleeping, clutching something she loved. But no, there was no life in her. Only peace and something else I couldn't name. When Father Alaric arrived from the rectory an hour later, dawn had begun to creep through the stained glass, casting broken colors across the floor. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a voice that rarely rose above a whisper. "Go, children," he told us gently. "Leave her to God." But as I turned to go, I saw him lift the blanket from her hands and unfold it carefully. Inside the folds was something faint, a small embroidered letter, barely visible in the dim light, an E stitched in gold thread. He froze, staring at it longer than seemed natural. Then he folded the cloth again and tucked it under his arm as if to shield it from sight. That moment rooted itself inside me like a seed. Something in his expression, sorrow mixed with recognition, told me this was not just an ordinary relic. By evening, the convent was silent again. The body had been prepared, the chapel sealed, and the sisters gathered in the dining hall for prayers. No one spoke of the blanket. When I tried to ask Sister Margaret, she shook her head sharply. The mother carried her secrets to God. "Agnes, best not to drag them back down." But I couldn't let it go. The image of that folded blanket haunted me. It wasn't grief, not exactly. It was curiosity sharpened by something I didn't understand. Why would a woman who had sworn her life to God die holding a baby's blanket? Whose baby? That night I couldn't sleep. The snow had begun to fall outside, soft flakes piling against the windowsills. I watched them from my narrow bed, listening to the sound of the wind howling through the stone corridors. I thought about Mother Clara's hands, how tightly they had clutched the cloth, as though it were her last connection to something she had lost long ago. Near midnight, I rose. The dormitory was quiet, the others asleep. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and lit a candle. My heart raced, but the pull was stronger than fear. The chapel door creaked when I pushed it open, the sound swallowed by the vastness of the room. Her coffin stood near the altar now, surrounded by lilies that smelled of sorrow. I knelt beside it and whispered a prayer I didn't know by heart. Then I looked at the place where she had knelt that morning, at the worn stone. The candle wax hardened into pale tears along the steps, and there, beneath the corner of the altar cloth, something caught the light of my candle. A small, square piece of parchment. I reached for it with trembling fingers and unfolded it. It was a letter. The writing was faded, the ink blurred, but I could still make out a few words. Forgive me. He was never meant to suffer, the boy. And then below it, the same letter embroidered on the blanket. E. The candle shook in my hand. I looked toward the coffin, half expecting her to open her eyes and explain. But she remained still, serene. I folded the note and hid it inside my sleeve. For a long time I stood there, listening to the faint hum of wind in the chapel rafters. Then I whispered, "I'll find him," though I didn't know who I was speaking to, her, God, or myself. The candle flickered once, though there was no draft. Then it went out. I did not sleep after the candle died. I lay awake in the dark, the letter tucked against my skin like a second heartbeat, and listened to the convent breathing, pipes ticking with cold, timbers settling, the faint, old wind that found every crack in the stone and pressed its face to it. When the first gray hint of morning bled into the dormitory, I slipped the letter into my habits inside seam and rose before the bell. In the refectory, steam curled from tin kettles and bowls of porridge. The sisters spoke in the careful, formal way grief demands. No one said her name. I ate without tasting, nodded when spoken to, and kept my gaze steady so it wouldn't betray me. Father Alaric sat at the end of the table with the bursar. His eyes shadowed as if he had not slept either. When he looked up, I felt the letter blister hot against my ribs. He seemed older than yesterday. As the dishes were cleared, his gaze slid past my face to the hand I kept near my sleeve. For a breath we hovered there, the two of us held by a string neither of us dared touch. Then he broke it with a small bow and left for the sacristy. I began with something that didn't look like beginning. The laundry. The novices were assigned to it in winter, scrubbing linen until our fingers went numb, and I claimed extra shifts until Sister Margaret stopped insisting I rest. In that room, where rope lines were strung like harp strings and steam ghosted the windows, the world grew narrow and honest. Cloth tells the truth other things hide. Thread remembers. Sister Beatrice, who had been seamstress long enough to know every garment by its stitch, sat bent over a basket with her thimble glinting. I took a breath and let my voice come out small. "Sister, do you remember the blanket Mother was holding?" She did not look up. "We are not to speak of it." "I know," I said, and let the sound of the ringer cover my next words. "But the embroidery, the little gold E, does it belong to our work? To this house?" The needle paused. She drew it through twice, knotting something invisible, and then set the cloth aside. "The gold is not ours," she said at last. "We mend with what we have. Coarse cotton, wool. That thread was finer. And older. See the way the curve of the letter flattened at the top? That is a hand that learned in another century. I have mended altar lace with less pride in it. Have you seen it before?" She lifted her eyes and pinned me still. "Sister Agnes, grief is a sea. If you go wading where you ought not, it will take you." I should have nodded and left it there. Instead, I said, "I found a letter." The ringer faltered under my hands. Noise spilled into silence. For a long beat, neither of us breathed. Then Sister Beatrice got up, crossed to the door, and slid the bolt. "What did it say?" "Not enough," I whispered. "Forgive me. He was never meant to suffer, the boy." And then the letter E again at the bottom, as if to sign it with the same thread. She pressed her fingers to her lips and lowered herself onto the stool, as if her bones had forgotten how. "She kept a journal," she said quietly. "Before you were born, before most of us. In the winter, they rebuilt the cloister roof. The workmen found a leather book fallen into the hollow above the sacristy vault. The abbess then, God rest her, ordered it sealed with the archives. Mother Clara never asked for it back. Perhaps she thought God had locked it on purpose. Where are the archives? The old scriptorium behind the library. The key hangs in the librarian's office. And the librarian? Sister Beatrice's mouth softened without smiling. She takes tea with the bursar. At this hour until the pot loses its will to steam. She unpinned the key from her belt, a simple, hammered iron thing with the weight of doors in it. I will say I dropped this and you, being young and foolish, picked it up to return it. Do you understand? I did. I closed my fingers around the cool metal and felt its teeth. The library smelled of paper and the last century. I walked as if I belonged there, passing rows of tall shelves, the cold drafting from the leaded windows and turning the light brittle. The scriptorium door was tucked behind a case of missals, half hidden by a tapestry of St. Michael driving his spear through a writhing shape. The key bit with a noise like a breath taken after too long underwater. Inside, dust rose at my step as if memory itself were startled awake. The room was not large. A table, 2 stools, wall cupboards with iron latches, and along the back, a chest with a lid reinforced by 3 bands. I lit the candle at the door and set it on the table. Shadows came up from the floor and stood politely at the edges while I lifted clasps and lids that had not been moved in years. Ledger after ledger, in a hand smoother than ours. Receipts for wheat, for nails, for bolts of wool. A list of baptisms from the village in a neat column, names marching with the seasons. And then, under a bundle of choir books bound with a ribbon gone the color of grave earth, a leather volume with worn corners and a single word too faint to read. I knew it before I opened it. Not what it would say, but how it would feel in the hand, warm with someone else's heat, as if the words held a fever. The first page was blank, but for a date, January of a winter 41 years gone. The second page was a prayer, written so plainly it could have been spoken. Lord, let silence be true. Then the voice grew. It grew into her. I read standing, barely daring to turn the pages. She had been not much older than I when she wrote the early entries. There was a garden she tended, and a child she taught to read from the catechism, and a hunger that did not leave when she left the table. She wrote about a man who came to repair the clock in the bell tower, who smelled of rain and iron, whose hands remembered time without looking at it. She wrote 3 times that she had not loved him, and once that she did. In the margins of that page, pressed so hard the nib cut the fiber, she wrote, "Forgive me." I sat then, candle guttering to a black tear on the brass holder. Each entry was a step she took out onto the ice of her vow and then back again. The child was named only once, and the name was crossed out so firmly the paper thinned. E. She wrote of hiding a small garment in the sacristy chest, of writing a letter to no one and everyone, of placing a sign in the chapel and begging Mary to be kind. There were weeks of blankness. Then he is gone. I am not enough human to break and not enough saint to be unbroken. Lord, take the middle of me and make it yours. I devoured the pages until the ink itself began to swim. Twice I heard a step in the corridor and held my breath and my heart both. When I set the book down, there were smudges of wax on my thumb and a certainty I could not yet name. I could not carry the journal out. It felt like theft from a grave. But I copied what I could in a trembling hand. The page with the letter, the description of the sacristy chest, the single torn name. I did not see the shadow until it moved. Agnes. I flinched so hard the candle kissed my skin. Father Alaric stood in the doorway, his face carved in light and dark. He did not step in. He did not ask what I held. His eyes fell to the book and then to my hands, then returned to the floor as if he could will his gaze to be innocent. "You must not be here," he said softly. "Not now." "Not ever?" The words left before I could cage them. He closed his eyes as if I had sung the wrong line of a hymn. "Please," he said, and the word was a prayer. "The sisters will think we disturb the dead. Go to your work. Leave this to me." "Leave what?" My voice was too sharp. I steadied it. "Father, you took the blanket from her hands as if you knew it already. You looked at the letter as if it had once addressed you. If you want me to leave it, Tell me the truth of what you are asking me to leave." His jaw worked once, twice, and then stilled. He stepped in and shut the door with such gentleness the latch barely whispered. Up close, he looked worn through. "I was a boy," he said finally. "A ward of this house. I do not remember my mother's face. I remember a narrow blanket and the smell of the sacristy wood. I remember a letter, sewn into the corner because I was given a name that began with one. Elias, they told me. Or Emil. It changed with the record books. The stone under my feet seemed to tilt. The book in my lap grew heavier as if it had soaked up every secret in the room and now was full enough to drown me. Then "I do not know that," he said quickly, and his voice cracked like ice. "I do not know anything. Records were lost. The old abbess forbade questions. I grew here, I learned here. I went away to the seminary and came back, because this is the only place I have ever understood." This morning I found the blanket in her hands and felt a boyhood. I had long buried stand-up and asked to be counted. That is all I will admit to God and to you. There are moments a life hinges on without ceremony. We stood in that small, dusty room while dust, motes turned in candlelight like tiny planets, and laid the blade of truth between us. If I had stepped to one side, if I had nodded and surrendered the key, if I had let his plea be the end of it, the story might have ended quietly. But the letter in my sleeve burned. The child's name scarred into paper burned. The curve of the gold thread burned until I thought it might brand my skin. "Then let us count," I said, my voice steady. "Let us count every ledger and every ledger's missing line. Let us count every year with a child in it and every winter that hides a birth. Let us count pages and milk deliveries and the names of midwives who came when no bell was rung." "We do not have that right," he said, but softer now, as if he had already moved an inch toward the place where right and mercy hem each other in. "No," I said, "but perhaps God does, and perhaps he is tired of keeping it." We searched like cowards and conspirators. I left first, the key tucked back into my sleeve, and he followed later, his hands empty, his mouth a straight line that meant nothing and everything. I returned the key to Sister Beatrice, and she did not ask where it had been. She simply ran her finger over the little cut the iron had left on my palm and said, "Keep vinegar on it so it won't fester." The next days became a map of small, disobedient errands. In the bursar's office, I begged to inventory the pantry, which put me near a ledge of old payment books. I learned that the convent had, one winter decades ago, bought more milk than mouths could drink. In the infirmary, I volunteered to change sheets, and Sister Helena, kind without noticing, let slip that once there had been a midwife who came through the side door by the orchard, when shame preferred moonlight. In the sacristy, I polished brass until my arms shook and found behind the altar stone, where a corner did not quite meet, a folded scrap of cloth. It wasn't a blanket. It was a cuff, cut from something larger, with a half letter embroidered in gold, just a curve, an opening, nothing whole. I brought it to the scriptorium after compline. The house slept. Father Alaric was already there, the lamp shaded low. He did not speak when I set the cloth on the table. He did not touch it. After a long time, he said, "There is a ledger for baptisms that is older than the others. It has a different hand. It is missing 3 pages between February and March of the year we do not name." "Ripped?" "Lifted," he said. "Cut free with a blade." "Who would—" "The hand that wrote them," he said, and with such flat certainty that I had to lean back as if the air had shoved me. "Or the hand that adopted what was written there as a life. We were thieves then, of quiet, of sleep, of the pretty lie that secrets keep you safe. We borrowed an afternoon under the fog of grief and carried the ledger to the light, squinting at wormholes and ink that had turned the color of tea. Names, dates, sponsors. The village midwife's mark, an X, with a flourish, reappearing like a swallow in spring. And then a gap so clean it was insulting. I slid my finger into it and felt nothing but absence. We might have given up if the book had not been poorly bound. On the seam where the threads pinched, a hair of gold glinted. It was no more than the breadth of an eyelash, caught in the stitching like a prayer snagging on thorns. We both bent close. My breath lifted the strand and let it fall. Father Alaric shut his eyes. "Do you need this to be true?" I asked him, before I could stop the cruelty in it. He opened his mouth, closed it. When he spoke, it was a boy, not a priest. "I need it to be something," he said. "We found the last thing because grief makes the clumsy careful." In the chapel, where lilies had yellowed and been replaced and yellowed again, the stone at the foot of the second pew on the left bore a shallow nick. Not new, not old. The kind of flaw a person makes when testing the edge of a knife against life. I pressed the cuff against it. The gold caught, and for a heartbeat the cloth stayed. Then it fell, as if the stone itself had let go. The next morning, Sister Margaret announced that Mother Clara's funeral would be on Friday and the bishop would attend. The house brightened the way houses do when a stranger is expected. Polish, starch, eyes that burn with anxiety. I moved among the chores like a ghost, my hands doing what they were told while my mind wrote lines no one had commissioned. Under the altar, 3 letters. In the sacristy chest, the faint scent of milk after snow. In the library ledger, a swallow. In my sleeve, a letter that had not finished its sentence and a cuff that had lost its wrist. On Thursday night, I went back to the chapel alone. I did not bring a candle because the chapel had a light of its own, the kind that comes from stone that has watched long enough to know what matters. I knelt where she had knelt. The cold came up through my knees and into my spine. "Mother," I whispered into the wood. "Show me where you put him." Nothing moved. Nothing in the world owes us an answer. And yet, at the join of the altar step and the floor, air shivered. Not like wind, like breath. I slid my fingers into the crack and felt impossibly cloth. Not the blanket. I would have known its softness by now, even in a grave. But a ribbon, narrow with a knot crushed flat by time. I pulled gently until a small wrapped parcel came free, shedding grit. It was no bigger than my palm. I took it to the sacristy, closed the door, and unwrapped paper that had gone the color of tarnished bone. Inside was a note and a medal. The note said only, "If any hand but mine opens this, forgive the hand that wasn't strong enough to keep both worlds." Under that, in a younger line, the medal was St. Joseph, patron of workers and fathers, worn thin by thumb rubs that had polished his face to a blur. I did not weep, not then. I wrapped both and replaced them in the crack, leaving one corner of the ribbon accessible, as if I had tucked a vein back into a wound and wanted at least to remember where it ran. When I stood, the chapel felt different, less empty. Or perhaps I had changed and the chapel simply reflected it back. I found Father Alaric outside in the cloister, counting his steps the way men pray when they cannot find words. I told him without telling him. "There is a place," I said. "If you want to know it, I will show you after the funeral. Not before." "Why not before?" "Because if the bishop knows," I said, "he will decide it. And I think this belongs to those who held it, and those held by it." He looked at me as if measuring whether to trust the audacity of a girl. Then he nodded once, a decision signing itself. The funeral day came white and cut clean out of winter. People from the village crowded the nave, faces red with cold and grief. The bishop's voice rolled, dignified and distant. He praised obedience, sacrifice, poverty. He did not say the word love. When the coffin lid closed, a sound moved through the pews that I have only heard twice in my life. The sound of a house lowering its voice so God can hear the quiet part. After the grave was filled and the villagers had been fed whatever we could warm, after the bishop's car had glassed away into the snow, I led Father Alaric back into the chapel. The lilies had their heads bowed, spent with too much holiness. I knelt again, slid my fingers to the ribbon, and drew out the parcel. He did not touch it. He stared at the knot and then at me, as if the knot were not in the ribbon but in his chest. "Open it," I said, and when he could not, I did. The metal shone the color of worn wedding bands. I put it in his hand. He closed his fingers over it and bent, very slowly until his brow touched his fist. A sound that was not crying and not prayer left him. When it passed, he lifted his head and opened his hand to me. In his palm lay a single hair, gold, caught in the ribbon's knot, as if a halo had tangled itself there years ago and never escaped. "Do you believe in signs, sister?" he asked, not looking at me. "I believe in mercy," I said. "And sometimes mercy needs a body." The light in the chapel did a strange thing then. It thickened, as if every candle had been relieved of flame and allowed to be pure light, and it fell in a single beam on the step where the parcel had slept. Dust brightened and hung there like a blessing midair. For a long breath, the room held its lungs full. Somewhere high in the rafters, a dove, whom we had never invited and would never evict, made a sound like a tiny, astonished amen. Father Alaric stood very straight. The metal lay against his skin. "If she was my mother," he said very softly, "she chose God where I would have chosen myself. If she was not, then God has decided I must live as if she were. And that is task enough for any man." I felt then what I had felt that first morning before dawn. The strange certainty that something had put its hand on the back of my neck and steered me to this precise point. But I did not call it providence, and I did not call it coincidence. I called it love, doing its work in the dark the way seeds do. We left the chapel with nothing changed and everything different. Sister Beatrice found me in the corridor and handed me a folded scrap of paper with no expression on her face. In her neat hand, she had copied a line from the journal I had not reached yet. "When the blanket is too heavy, pray to Joseph. He will carry what a woman cannot." That night a wind rose that had not been in the forecast, if we had such things, and ran around the eaves like a child freed from a pew. The bell rope swayed without a hand. In my cell I lay awake and felt a warmth on my cheek as if someone had placed a palm there to bless my fever. When I opened my eyes, the candle on the sill, which I had not lit, burned with a thin blue edge. I cupped it, baffled and grateful in equal measure, and let it light a page where I began to write the story down so I would not lie to myself. Later, about what I had seen. In the morning, I would return to the scriptorium and finish reading. I would find the page with the child's full name written once in courage and struck once in fear. I would learn the midwife's surname and the lane by the orchard, and the hour the side door was opened, and the shape of the sin that looks like sacrifice when you are standing in the wrong light. I would carry it all like contraband to the chapel and ask it to sit down next to Grace. But in that hour between night and bell, I let the little blue flame burn until it was only a dot, and then no dot at all. And I slept with my palm open on my chest, as if a medal had been set there to guard what I could not. Winter stayed longer than it should have that year. The snow outside turned gray and crusted, and the courtyard well froze all the way to its stone lip. Inside, the convent lived half in silence and half in whispers. Grief fades quickly when work demands your hands, but not when it haunts your sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mother Clara's fingers curled around the baby's blanket, the golden thread catching the candlelight, that look on Father Alaric's face, shock, and something like recognition. He avoided me for days. I knew because I counted the absences. He stopped taking breakfast in the refectory, stopped walking the outer cloister at dusk, but his shadow lingered, in the confessional, where his coat hung still warm from his shoulders, and in the chapel, where his voice left echoes that smelled faintly of incense and iron. Sister Beatrice said once, "The living avoid the places where the truth waits. The dead do not." I was beginning to understand what she meant. After the funeral, I had promised Father Alaric we would wait. But waiting felt like a sin when silence kept growing teeth. I wanted to believe I was searching for her, for Mother Clara. And not for myself, but both were true. It was Sister Helena who gave me the next clue without meaning to. She was in charge of washing the chapel linens, and she complained that one of the embroidered altar cloths had gone missing again. "It's always that one," she said, rubbing her wrist sore from wringing water. "The one with the lilies. She used to keep it locked away after Mass, said it was too delicate for our rough hands. Nonsense. Fabric's meant to serve." "She?" I asked, pretending not to know. "Mother Clara," Helena said, sighing. She always stitched something into the hems, little prayers she called them. "Threads of faith," she said, for when words failed. That evening I went to the linen cupboard behind the sacristy. It was colder there than in the rest of the building, as if the stone itself refused warmth. The shelves smelled of lavender and dust. The embroidered cloth was missing indeed, but something else was not. A small tin box pushed far to the back, its lid dull and dented. I pulled it down. It rattled softly. Inside were letters, 4 of them, bound with a fraying ribbon. The first was addressed simply To E, wherever he may be. My hands shook. I sat on the floor and read by the weak light of the single lantern. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but her handwriting was unmistakable, the same loops and slant I'd seen in the journal. My son, I cannot ask forgiveness from a child I never held. They told me it was for your salvation and mine, but I have never stopped hearing your first cry in my dreams, even if I never truly heard it in life. I hope you were given a gentler name than the one I whispered in my sin. If you ever find this, know that God has forgiven me. I only pray that you will too. Your mother in faith and in silence. Clara. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back. The second envelope was older, darker at the edges, sealed with wax long cracked. I hesitated, then opened it. The handwriting was different, a man's, angular and precise. Clara, you must not send these letters. They will only bring ruin. The boy is safe, you must believe that. The convent cannot bear scandal, nor can the church. Your vows are eternal. One mistake cannot erase them, only test them. I will see to the child's welfare. Do not write again. My breath caught. I turned the paper over. There was a small smudge of soot, as though the writer had meant to burn it and changed his mind. The tone was cold, but the edges of the words betrayed care, almost desperation. Father Alaric? The thought struck me like a bell. Could it be him? Or his predecessor, someone who had carried the same name? I wanted to dismiss it, but memory betrayed me. His eyes when he saw the blanket, the way his voice trembled when he said he didn't remember his mother's face. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the thump of my heart against the folded parchment of her letter, still hidden in my sleeve. That night I couldn't bring myself to eat. I took my dinner roll and left it on the chapel step as an offering, though I didn't know to whom, to her, to God, or to the secret that was eating both of them alive. The days turned gray. The wind sang through the old stone like a requiem. I went about my chores, scrubbing the refectory tables, hauling buckets of coal, polishing brass candlesticks. But every moment, my thoughts drifted back to the box of letters. I couldn't keep them, but I couldn't give them up either. So I did what I should not have done. I took them to Father Alaric. He was in his office, the small one behind the library, where the smell of old paper lingered like a ghost. He looked up as I entered, his expression wary. Sister Agnes, he said quietly, you shouldn't be here. I found these, I said, setting the tin box on his desk. He froze. His hands didn't move for several seconds. When he finally reached for it, he did so as though it might shatter. He opened the lid, saw the letters, and closed it again. Where? He asked. In the sacristy linen cupboard. Hidden. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. You read them? Yes. He didn't scold me. He didn't even look angry. Only tired. Deeply, soulfully tired. You shouldn't have to carry this, he said. It isn't your burden. It became mine the moment she died holding that blanket, I said. I want to understand why. He looked at me then, truly looked. And if the truth hurts you? It already does. He rubbed his temples. These letters? I think I know the hand. Not hers, the other one. You do? He hesitated, then nodded. Father Anton. He served here before me. He left suddenly 30 years ago. No one ever said why. But my records, the old seminary files, they list his parish as this one. The timing fits. So he knew her. Yes. Then He stopped me with a look. Don't say what we can't prove. But we both knew. We sat in silence for a long time, the snow tapping softly against the window pane. Finally, he spoke again. Agnes, if she was my mother, if what we suspect is true, then she kept me here, under the same roof all my life. Without ever saying my name aloud, I saw tears gather in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. And now she's gone. And I don't know whether to forgive her or to beg her forgiveness. There's more, I said softly. I think she wanted you to find it. The blanket. The letters. The journal. All of it. He shook his head. No, she meant them for God, not for me. But maybe, I said, God meant them for you. He didn't answer. His eyes were on the crucifix above the door. I left him there, in the half-light of his lamp, and walked the cloister until my fingers went numb. That night, the convent seemed quieter than usual. The moon hung like a silver wafer above the bell tower. I found myself drawn back to the chapel again, though I told myself I was only going to pray. When I opened the door, a draft of cold air rushed past me, carrying the faint scent of lilies. The candles on the altar flickered, though I hadn't lit them, and then I saw it. The blanket. It was draped over the front pew, folded neatly, as if someone had laid it there only moments ago. I froze. I had seen Father Alaric lock it away in his office days ago. How could it be here? I stepped closer, trembling. The golden letter E shimmered faintly in the moonlight. My hand hovered above it, afraid to touch. "Mother?" I whispered. "Is that you?" No answer. Only the faint creak of the roof beams above. Then the candles flared. All at once, though no match had touched them. For an instant, I saw her, not as she had looked in death, but young, luminous, kneeling before the altar, her hands resting gently over the blanket. Her lips moved as if in prayer. And then she was gone. The light dimmed, the cold rushed back in, and I was alone again. But when I looked down, something new had appeared on the blanket, faint, as if written in dust. Find his name. The message on the blanket would not leave me. Find his name. It echoed through every sound, the bell, the wind, the squeak of the refectory floorboards. Even in prayer I heard it. Each syllable felt less like a command and more like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. The next morning, frost covered the inner cloister so thick it looked as if the world had been dusted with glass. The others went about their chores. Grief, when shared by many, becomes ritual. But for me it had become an investigation dressed as faith. I went first to the library again. The archivist, Sister Beatrice, met my eyes only briefly, as if we both knew what trespass waited between us. She said nothing when I carried the baptism ledger back to my corner. I turned its pages slowly, tracing each year, each winter christening. There were names like patterns in lace: Honora, Benedict, Corvin. Then the abrupt torn place between February and March of the missing year. 3 pages gone. The knife marks were clean, surgical. Whoever had cut them out had known exactly what they were erasing. I felt certain now that the child had been baptized here. But by whom and under what name? The parish records in town might still exist. If snow had not swallowed them as it had everything else, I could not leave the convent without permission. No novice could. Yet the thought of those missing pages gnawed at me until even prayer tasted of guilt. That night I sought out Father Alaric again. He sat by the hearth in his narrow quarters, a candle guttering low beside him. His face looked carved from worry. "You saw her, didn't you?" he said quietly before I could speak. I froze. "How did you—" "Your eyes," he murmured. "They look like someone who's been near light too bright to name." I nodded. She was there. In the chapel. Only for a moment. He closed his eyes. "I have felt her too. Not seen but felt." The air changes. "You know she's near. I placed the blanket between us. The embroidered E caught the flame. She left a message." He leaned closer. I told him everything. The letters, the box, the words written in dust. When I finished, he said only, "Then she means you to finish what she began." "I can't leave the convent," I whispered. He reached into his coat and drew out a small brass key. "The outer gate is locked at dusk," he said. "But this opens the side door by the orchard. You'll find the parish hall 2 miles down the hill. Ask for Father Seamus. Tell him nothing, only that you seek the baptismal book of March, the year of the northern blizzard." I stared at the key. "If they learn I've gone—" "Then let them punish me instead," he said, and something in his voice made me believe he meant it. I left after Compline. The snow had crusted to ice. Every step cracked the night. The moon hung low, a frozen wafer in a black sky. The world smelled of iron and pine. When I reached the gate, my hands shook too much to fit the key in the lock. But it turned anyway, almost on its own. The path wound down the hill past. Bare trees whose branches looked like fingers pointing at heaven. Once or twice I thought I heard footsteps behind me. But when I turned, there was only wind. I reached the parish hall near midnight. Its windows glowed faintly, Someone was still awake. Father Seamus was an old man, thin and kind-eyed. He didn't seem surprised to see a nun appear out of snow. "Come in, child," he said, leading me to the stove. "You look half frozen." I told him I sought a baptismal record from decades ago, a winter when a child had been brought here by someone from our convent. He nodded slowly, as if the memory was already stirring. "Ah, yes. I remember a night like that. A blizzard so fierce the bell tower froze solid. A woman came with a bundle, said the babe must be christened at once. No man was with her, though her hands shook like one who'd lost everything." He shuffled to a tall cabinet and drew out a massive book bound in cracked leather. Dust rose like incense when he opened it. "Here, March." His finger traced down the column, until it stopped at a blank space. "Strange," he murmured. "There was an entry once. I remember writing it, but look, it's been scraped clean." I leaned closer. The page was faintly scarred where ink had been lifted, but at an angle, under the lamplight, I could see the ghost of letters. Not a whole word, just a curve, a line, an opening, an E. "Can you remember the name?" I asked. He squinted. "Elias. Yes, Elias, and then something Latin, Donatus, perhaps?" "Given, the found one. Elias." I felt the world tilt, just slightly, as if the ground beneath my boots had become something alive. "Was there a surname?" He shook his head. "She would not give one. Said he belonged to God alone." When I returned to the convent, dawn was bleeding pink into the horizon. I slipped the key back under Father Alaric's door and went straight to the chapel. The lilies had dried to paper. The air smelled of wax and stone. I knelt where she had died and whispered, "Elias? Is that his name?" The candles trembled. Behind me, a voice said softly, "Yes." I turned, expecting a shadow. It was Father Alaric. His face was pale, his breath visible in the cold. "You found it," he said. I nodded. He knelt beside me, his hands clasped so tightly the knuckles whitened. "I don't know what to do with it," he whispered. "The name feels too big. Like it belongs to someone holier than me." "She wanted you to have it," I said. "She wanted you to know." He looked up at the crucifix. "Then let it stay here. Let the truth belong to the silence that kept it all these years." We prayed together until the first light touched the stained glass. I thought it was over then, that the search had ended. But the convent had one more secret to give. That afternoon, while the sisters prepared bread, a crash echoed from the old bell tower. The ropes had rotted for years, but now the bell tolled on its own. One long, hollow note that shivered through every corridor. We ran outside, the cold biting our cheeks. The tower door swung open, though none of us had the key. Inside, dust swirled in golden light. At the top, near the mechanism, lay a small wooden box that had not been there before. On its lid, burned into the grain, was the same golden letter E. Father Alaric climbed first. He carried it down as carefully as one might carry an infant. We gathered in the chapel while he set it on the altar and opened it. Inside lay the missing baptism pages. The ink was faint but legible. Elias Donatus, born of Clara, servant of God, given to the church on the feast of the Annunciation. May the Lord keep him. Under the line, in a hand shakier but familiar, another had written, "Found again by light?" Sister Beatrice crossed herself, weeping. "How could those pages appear now?" she whispered. No one answered. But sunlight burst through the narrow window then, striking the altar, spilling gold over the box, the blanket, and Father Alaric's face. For a heartbeat, the whole room shimmered as if underwater. I swear I heard the faint cry of an infant echo through the beams, soft and clear, and then it was gone. Father Alaric looked at me. His lips trembled. "She's at peace," he said. And in that moment I believed him. After the bell tower day, the convent changed. Not in any way the world would notice. No new stones, no new hymns, but the air itself seemed different, lighter somehow. Even the wind sounded softer when it passed through the cloister. Some of the sisters said it was because spring was near, but I knew better. The silence had been lifted, the kind that had weighed on every prayer, every wall. The truth had been given breath again. We kept the box on the altar for 7 days before sealing it in the archives. Father Alaric said it should rest beside her diary, not as scandal but as testimony, proof that love, though forbidden could still find its way to grace. I copied the entry myself in careful script. Elias Donatus, given to the church and returned by the light. Every night since, I've knelt in the chapel at the same hour she died. The lilies bloom again now, new stems in old vases. The scent of them no longer makes me think of mourning. It smells instead of something forgiven. Father Alaric does not speak of her much anymore, but sometimes I find him in the chapel, staring at the crucifix as if listening to someone I cannot hear. Once, late at night, I passed his office and saw him writing a letter by candlelight. He was crying. Not the kind that breaks, but the kind that mends. He didn't notice me, and I didn't interrupt. Some prayers need no witnesses. It was on the first Sunday after Easter that the miracle happened. The day began ordinary. The villagers came up for Mass, children in clean shoes, the smell of bread rising from baskets at their sides. I helped Sister Helena polish the candlesticks and lay the embroidered cloth, the one with the lilies Mother Clara had always hidden away. The blanket rested folded beneath the statue of the Virgin, wrapped in white linen. No one touched it anymore, but everyone felt it near. The Mass began like any other. The organ wheezed softly, birds sang in the rafters. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass into gold and crimson shards. But halfway through the final hymn, the light changed. It grew brighter, impossibly bright, until the colors vanished and all that remained was pure white. As if heaven had exhaled. Gasps rippled through the chapel. I shielded my eyes and yet could not look away. The light poured directly over the altar, over the cloth and onto the folded blanket. For an instant it lifted, not fully, not as if by wind, but as though someone invisible had picked it up gently, reverently, and then faint but unmistakable, a baby cried. The sound was soft and sweet, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. The older sisters fell to their knees. One fainted. Father Alaric froze mid-breath, his mouth open, his face pale as marble. The light lingered, pulsing like a heartbeat, and I swear I saw her again, Mother Clara, standing just behind the altar, young as she must have been before sorrow took her. She was smiling. In her arms she held a child wrapped in that same blanket, his tiny hand reaching toward the light. She looked at Father Alaric, and I saw her lips form words. "Forgive yourself." Then the light faded. The crying stopped. Only the echo of the hymn remained. For a long time no one spoke. Even the bell was silent. Then quietly, Father Alaric began to pray aloud, not in Latin, but in the language of the heart, each word trembling like the first breath after drowning. "Lord, if mercy has a name, let it be written here. Let this house remember love, and let no vow turn it to shame again." The next morning the blanket was gone. Only a single golden thread remained on the altar, coiled like sunlight. No one saw who took it, but we all knew it had gone where it was always meant to go. Life went on. The seasons turned, the walls warmed, laughter returned to the halls. Pilgrims began visiting, whispering stories of a holy light at the convent, of lilies blooming out of season, of prayers answered in the voice of a child. The church tried to quiet it at first. Miracles are troublesome things, but truth has a way of ringing louder than the bell. Father Alaric stayed with us another year. Then one evening, he left without ceremony, walking down the path that led into the valley fog. He left me a note, short and steady. "Agnes, if faith is obedience, love is its rebellion. Both lead home. Take care of the chapel. The light is yours now? Elias." Elias. Not Father Alaric, not anymore. He had taken back his name at last. I never saw him again. But sometimes when I sit alone in the chapel at dawn, I feel that same soft warmth brush my cheek, like the hand of a mother or a child, and I hear the faint cry again, not of pain, but of life being born twice. I light a candle for him every morning, for her too, and for the silence that turned into light. The world will never write their story as scripture, but I keep it in my heart like one. Because sometimes miracles aren't about angels or visions. Sometimes they're about truth finding a way to live. Sometimes they're about forgiveness finally daring to speak. And sometimes they are as simple as a mother, waiting half a lifetime to hold her child, and the light that stayed behind to show she finally did.